Hello everybody, this is Connor at BoatsDon'tSink here with another Shadowverse Evolve video. This time we're going to be looking at the new set BP09 Duet of Dawn and Dusk. We're going to be doing a bit of a meta overview here, similar to last set, with a tier list for how I expect this set to look overall. Before we jump into the decks from the set, we'll take a look at the actual content of BP09. It's got some pretty cool stuff in it. It's a bit bigger than a normal set. So, looking at what we got here. First off, the double-sided evolutions. This is sort of the main theme of BP09. They are... every class got one evolved follower that has two sides to it, similar to the Orcus from BP08. Most of these are going to sort of represent the light and dark, dawn and dusk sides of these cards, where they can either evolve into a Lightborn or Cutthroat side. Generally, the light side is going to either be a cheaper cost or healing kind of effect, whereas the dark sides are either burn damage or removal, or generally just more expensive finisher effects. Similar to how, of course, Orcus from last set, the light side was the lower cost, gave you the wards that heal. The heavier cost one, the dark side, was the finisher that you'd use to burn your opponent out. So a lot of the same similar stuff going on here. Every class gets access to one. Some of them are more archetype focused. You see that with Rune and Abyss, sort of in the academic and vampire archetypes, whereas the others a little more open-ended on where they want to go. But that is a cool sort of defining theme of this set. Next up, we have the deluxe starter decks that were added in. These were two starter decks that released alongside BP010 or BP10 in Japan. And they decided, instead of releasing the decks, they were going to combine them into a set here. And BP09 made the most sense, since this set does already have a small amount of support for both of the archetypes that were featured in the decks. So they got combined into this set. It is the Runecraft Academic deck and the Dragoncraft Draconic Duelist deck. As I said, both of these already had a small handful of cards in this set to support them, and now they have just the entire decks pretty much self-contained within this set. Academic does have a few older cards, but Draconic Duelist is entirely self-contained within this set. And for better or worse, they did make this set a bit bloated, a bit large, and makes it pretty heavy on Rune and Dragon cards, but it does shake up our meta a bit, adds a couple new decks that Japan didn't have here, that could throw things a little in a different direction than what people might have been expecting otherwise. And of course, lastly, we have support for new decks and existing older decks, just spread across all the classes as usual. A couple old decks from BP01, BP02 are going to get some cards here, and of course, some newer decks are going to get introduced all together. So now we'll jump in, we'll look class by class in order at the new and updated decks that we've got coming out of this set. I'm only going to cover ones that I think are worth taking a look at, not even necessarily worth playing, but worth looking at the packages that were introduced that sort of define these decks. Some of these are things that are going to be good now, some are things that might need a little more help, but are worth looking at right now. So first up, for Forest Craft, we have, of course, Puppetry Forest. This was the big deck last set, so not a whole lot new introduced for it, so not going to spend too long on this one. It is, of course, still focused on all of the Orcus interactions, setting up all the puppet tokens from last set. The one new card that it got is Substitution. This is a quick timing 2-cost spell. You get to return an enemy 3-cost or lower follower to your opponent's hand, and then you get a puppet into your EX area. One thing that the Puppetry deck struggled with was sort of setting itself up for big combo turns while also dealing with the opponent's board. You very much don't want to have to send your own Victoria tokens into your opponent's followers to stay alive. So this gives them a card that can both keep the opponent sort of from being able to pressure too much, while getting more puppets into EX area to set up their own game plan. So minor upgrade, but fills an important hole that the deck needed nonetheless. Next up, we have Spell Forest. So this is a new deck introduced in this set. Forest has, of course, always had spells, though it's not been super heavily focused on them outside of maybe a specific spell in a specific deck. But now, with this new archetype, Yggdrasil is going to want us to have as many different spells with different names as possible in our cemetery. So Yggdrasil lets us search our deck for spells, and she lets us recast spells out of our cemetery. She also got these sort of like light and dark double-sided cards here, though instead of being a double-sided evolution, it is actually just two separate spells. So we have Blessings of Creation for the light card, and then Wrath of Nature for the dark card. Blessings is a draw and heal if you have 5 different spells in cemetery. Wrath is a board wipe. It's a small sweeper effect that gets bigger and also does face damage if you have 5 different spells in cemetery. And the deck also got some more support. It's double-sided evolution, actually. Lets us dig for spells. Forest craft spells specifically, you have to note for all these. You can't play a bunch of neutral spells and get away with just having even more good cards. But we get Paula to be able to dig for forest craft spells. A handful of other followers that are either going to give us bonus effects for meeting that 5 or more different spells in cemetery, or discard outs to fill our cemetery quicker without having to play spells. And most of these discard outs are also going to draw us cards back and do additional things. So Lila's going to discard us a card to heal us, and if it was a spell, we draw a card. Gringolin Axeman discards a card to deal damage, and if it was a Forestcraft spell, we get to draw a card back into our hand. So a bunch of stuff focused around filling our cemetery with these spells quickly to turn on bonus effects. Of course, this deck is going to be playing a lot of the usual, very low-cost, cantrippy forest spells, since you want to just sort of churn through them, get a bunch of them into your cemetery very quickly. These synergize with the cards I just showed, like Lila, where you can bounce them, play them again, hand filter again, or even just cards like Harvest Festival that we've had since the beginning to be able to draw extra cards to set up all these things. Currently, I think the deck's biggest issue is that it kind of lacks a good win condition. Silverbolt is probably the best thing it has going for it, since you can use Yggdrasil to recast Silverbolt for 1 play point from your cemetery. But otherwise, just things like Ivy Spellbomb chipping away, Wrath of Nature chipping away, Silverbolt shooting your opponent are probably going to be the best directions you can go in. And if the deck can just draw enough cards and keep a big enough hand, maybe looking at something like King Elephant as just a giant storm finisher is going to be the payoff that you've got here. Next up, we have the Beast Forest deck. This is probably the most incomplete of the Forest decks we're going to be looking at. So the new main legendary that they got is White Vanara. It's a 4-cost 2/2. It is very similar to Okami from the original Forest starter deck, where whenever another follower enters, this gets +1/+1. But if that follower is a beast, this gets +2/+2 instead. And then once it evolves, it loses that ability, but instead, if it has 4 attack or more, it has Ward, 7 or more, it has Storm, 10 or more, it ignores Ward when attacking. And then Strike, it deals damage equal to its attack to an enemy follower. So this is similar to King Elephant, right, where we're trying to just get a giant storm body that can swing past Ward, kill our opponent, and just blow them out in one big swing. Unfortunately, having a bunch of beasts in your deck is a lot harder than just drawing a bunch of cards. We do get Owlman in this set, which on play gives another beast +1/+1, which also triggers White Vanara's effect, so he can actually give +3/+3 by coming in, and he only costs 1. So playing this, bouncing it, playing it again is probably one of your best ways to just beef up stats as fast as possible. But we do have some older beast support as well, such as Cosmos, Fang, and Slade, which can sort of help us either search out White Vanara or search out things to buff it. Or Slade, right, can put itself back into play for free when it's bounced. So that can help you sort of chain buffs more easily. Unfortunately, the only other way, there's not a whole lot of good beasts, and the only other way that we're going to be able to beef up White Venara is through cards like Anastasia, Fashionista Nelcha, and Ariet, which are more just generic buff effects or combo-tied buff effects. Unfortunately, none of these are beasts, so they're going to be a little harder to fit in with the rest of the stuff. So this is a deck I would sort of keep an eye on. Like White Venara is at least a card I would keep an eye on until we get some more beasts in the future, and maybe they'll have something to sort of round this out a little better. Next up, we're going to be looking at Swordcraft. So first up, Swordcraft gets the token sword deck in this set. You'll see a lot of people call this the black and white sword, chromatic sword, which is now Chromatic Duel, has been renamed in paper to Monochrome Duel. So like monochrome sword, based around these two characters introduced in this set. Queen Hemera the white and Queen Magnus the black. So they're a 3-drop and 2-drop. Hemera summons a knight on play, but if you have Magnus, she summons 2 instead. And then Magnus gives your Hemera a sail and can engage to buff 2 other Swordcraft followers on your field by +1 attack. So these two cards work together to create tokens and then buff their stats up to attack with them. Hemera has Rush, so giving her a sail turns her into good removal. And Hemera also gives you a knight into your EX area on strike. So Monochrome Duel, the spell that features both of them, searches your deck for both of them, summons them. So for 5 play points, you get the 2 of them for only 1 card. And it gives them both +1/+1. So it makes them even stronger. And then it has an activated ability to pay 2 and banish it from your cemetery to give each knight token on your field +1 attack and storm. Meaning for 7 play points, you can play this, get both queens. Hemera makes 2 knights. Your Magnus can engage to buff them both to 2/1s, and then you can banish the spell to make them 3/1 storms, swing in for 6 storm damage, and then you still have a 5/4 and a 3/3 left on your board. Overall, pretty good package, but it's far from everything that we've got going on for this deck. We get a new legendary, Celia, Sky Commander. This is the double-sided Evo for Sword. It is essentially... also, it's a 1-cost 2/2, so it's a goblin. Already great for Sword. For paying 1 play point to evolve, you get a 1/1 ward. Or, for 4 play points, you get Floral Fencer with Storm. So, for 1 extra play point over Floral Fencer, it now has Storm. But it's also even better on like turns 1 and 2. So this is almost just a Floral Fencer replacement. Though you can run them alongside each other as well if you'd like. But this makes good tokens and is a good card on its own. We also have the new Prim and Nonya package. So Prim summons a 1/1 on play. On evolve, searches a 3-cost 4/4, which is already really good stats. But the 3-cost 4/4 only costs 2 if you have Prim, and it's a draw 2, discard 2, so it can help us dig for our like spell and stuff like that. And Prim's making a token in the process. What are we doing with all these tokens? Well, A, Swords and aggro deck tokens can attack your opponent. But B, we get cards like Savage Swordsman, which is a 3/3 for 1 if we have a token follower on the field, and Ralmia, which, of course, staple in the aggressive sword decks since it came out in set 6, costs 1 less to evolve for every other follower on your field, and on evolve can buff itself +1/+1 for every other follower on our field. So making all these tokens is going to give us great payoff as an aggro deck, be able to buff Ralmia, be able to swing with a lot of things. Magnus can keep buffing tokens. Overall, just a very fast, aggressive deck. Sort of why I've decided to name it Token Sword here instead of Black and White. I think it has a focus on a lot of things outside of just the queens that give you a very strong, well-rounded aggro deck here. Spartacus. This is the other new legendary for Swordcraft in this set. Spartacus is a 5-cost 4/6 ward. At the start of your end phase, discard any number of cards. Draw that many +1. Then, if there's 1 or less in your deck, you win the game. So this is very similar to Jace, Wielder of Mysteries, or potentially even Thassa's Oracle, but more likely Jace, Wielder of Mysteries from Magic the Gathering. A card with a similar effect that allows you to win the game by decking out. Some people, may refer to this as Laboratory Maniac, Labman. another card that allowed you to win the game by decking out. Sword is an interesting place for this to be. If you think about decking yourself out, you're probably thinking about like milling yourself out with Abyss or drawing a bunch of cards with Rune. Sword is a weird spot for that to be. But, as I mentioned with the last deck, we do have cards like Prim, which can search our deck for a draw 2, discard 2. That's 3 cards removed. We have cards like Maid Leader, Ether, that let us search our deck and take followers out of our deck. And the new Bronze, 5 cost 3/3 Tycoon, that lets us discard 3 to draw 3 and recover 2 play points. So lots of ways to sort of just thin our deck and then churn through the cards in our deck and filter them out. In addition to Spartacus himself, we play him for 5 and then have like a 4-card, 5-card hand. We get to discard that and draw 5 or 6 cards. So that's another huge chunk of cards that we're cycling through, trying to get through our deck. And of course, you can also play a bunch of just cheap cantrips. Bellringer Angel, obviously, been around since the beginning. Cards like Kiss of the Princess, that lets us draw a card. Elegance in Action lets us draw a card. These things are going to be able to just help us get through our deck pretty quickly. I think this deck is still lacking a little bit to sort of stay alive and stay in the game while it's trying to execute this game plan. But alternate win conditions are always powerful. And there's definitely going to be some stuff in the future that makes Spartacus even more worth looking at. Next up, we have Natura Sword from set 7, still a very relevant threat in the meta. I think just all of the cards in this deck are thoroughly powerful. But the main reason I bring it up again here is because we have a lot of cards that draw, in case you haven't noticed. So Balian lets us take 2 cards out of our deck. Desert Pathfinder lets us take a card out of our deck. Nateran Great Trees let us draw a card, discard a card. And when you combine that with the increased consistency we got last set from Ether of the Warrior Wing and the new Spartacus, it actually allows Natura Sword to play the same powerful game plan it's always had, if not a little more consistently, but also with an alternate win condition tied to it that it can lean into in matchups where it can't kill the opponent. So more controlling matchups or more heal-heavy matchups where you just can't quite get the damage you need, you can just sack a bunch of Nateran Great Trees over and over again until you draw your deck and win off of Spartacus. So decent upgrade to think about there as well. Moving into our third class, we have Runecraft. This is going to have a chunk of decks, partially because of the deluxe starter decks added, but partially also because this set just sort of decided to support a handful of things. First up, we have Earthright. This is the big one. This is what I'd say probably most people are expecting to be the best deck out of this set. It's either this or one other one that we'll get to. But this is definitely one of the big contenders people are looking at. Earthright Rune, back from set 1. Finally good, finally in the spotlight. Big things we got here are basically all of the Rune legendaries. So Caradwyn can Earthright to make a removal spell. On Evolve, she Earthrights to make a reanimation spell. And she makes these token spells free, basically, for the first one you play each turn. Faust is a 5-drop that searches 2 Earth Sigils from our deck on play, and lets us play them for free. He has to be a total cost 4 or lower, so you can get like 2 2-drops or a 3 and a 1. And then at the start of your end phase, you can Earthright to buff a follower and burn the opponent. On their own, these are great effects. Very good for just consistency, power, a lot of like just chip damage burning. This set also gave us a new amulet that's pretty great. The Summoning Drills for 2 costs gives us a guard form, and you can discard a card to make a strike form and buff all of your golems on field and EX by +1 attack. If you've played Earthright, you know golems are pretty relevant. Things like Ancient Alchemist, of course, also going to be making us golems here. And Beast-Faced Mage, our new follower, 1 cost 2/2. Last Words gives us a sediment, and then can Earthright to deal 2 to an enemy follower. So good mid-rangey card. If we need to attack with it, it's a good goblin. If we need to use it for removal, it can do that, and it leaves us with a sediment when it dies. Obviously, still playing all of the good, cheap amulets from the previous sets. Things like Teachings of Creation, Witch's Cauldron, Gingerbread House, and Red Hot Ritual, among others. And, of course, we still have the powerful followers that are going to serve as our finishing package for the deck. Ancient Alchemist from set 1 gives us golems on Fanfare with Earthright, and then burns our opponent or an enemy follower for 3 every time a golem enters. This is great with summoning drills because it lets us get extra golems set up to be able to play for cheap with Ancient Alchemist. But also, Riley, the set 7 gold that we got, obviously already pretty solid. Fanfare, you can Earthright to choose to either deal 5 to a follower, gain 3 attack, or draw 2. You can pay 6 to bring it back from Cemetery with Storm. However, when you bring it back from Cemetery, the Fanfare lets you choose all 3 modes, which was really cool. However, the only way to bring it back from Cemetery was its own pay 6 effect. Now that we have Caradwyn letting us use the reanimation spells that she gives us, we can actually reanimate Riley multiple times throughout the game for 2 play points, and use her Earthright to deal 5 damage, gain 3 attack, and draw 2 cards. It will destroy her at the end of the turn, so the 3 attack isn't huge, but it gives her rush and allows her to trade into something. So double removal and draw 2, essentially. We get 5 damage removal and 6 damage attack removal, plus draw 2 for 2 play points. And being able to do that multiple times throughout a game is just back-breaking in terms of resources. And then finally, you can just pay 6 to Storm with her once you're ready to go for a kill. So very powerful package here. Basically gave Earthright the exact sort of specific things they needed to be a relevant deck here. Of course, we have Academic Rune from the Deluxe Starter deck. This is focused around Anne and Greya. So we saw them originally back in set 2. They each got new cards here. Anne, Fanfare, if we have... we get to choose 1 mode, and then if we have 10 Academic cards in Cemetery, we can choose 2 instead. We can either search for Anne's Sorcery or Greya. She puts Greya into play. She makes the Anne's Sorcery cost 5 less. So basically, whichever one you search, you get to play for free. Anne's Sorcery is a removal spell, deals 4 and draws a card. Or, if you have 10 Academic, you can pay 3 to deal 8 and draw 2. They can hit follower or face, so this is a burn spell that we can use to try to kill our opponent. The goal, so Greya, that we'll look at in a second, makes all of our Academic cards do extra damage. That just makes them do 1 more. So the goal here is, of course, to get Greya and the Anne's Sorcery burn for extra damage, and just sort of burn our opponent out that way. A lot of these cards that you'll see are going to require a certain number of Academic cards in our Cemetery, so they're going to want us to play entirely Academic here. Greya, 3 cost 3/3. If we have 10 Academic cards, she deals 4 to an enemy follower, 1 to its leader. On Evo, she searches her Angelic Snipe clone and makes it free, and it gets bonus damage. It does 3 instead of 2 if we have 5 Academic in Cemetery. And then Greya is going to make any of our spells do 1 extra damage, as I said. So just get a lot of sort of burn damage, removal effects, solid card advantage plays while we're trying to fill our Cemetery. We get a ton of followers in this set, mostly thanks to the Academic Starter deck. We get the dual-sided Evo, which is actually from the set itself, it has to discard on play, but it draws you a card back. And then it can Evo to either burn the opponent with a Assail 5/5 or Heal 3 with a Ward 5/5. So good for aggression or defense. We get Veil that lets us look at top 5, get 2 cost 2 or lowers, and they're free this turn, which lets us play extra cards, which of course is going to fill our Cemetery quicker. Tico is a small ward that lets us essentially draw a card when she dies. Pala draws us a card on play. Bertrand makes a Mysterian Missile, which is a new token that we got. It's just a removal spell that, if we have 10 Academic in Cemetery, also burns the opponent, which can also be boosted by the Greya Evo. Or, if we have 5 Academic in Cemetery, he can add a spell back to our hand. We get a new spell in Mysterian Knowledge, which is just a draw spell that also gives us a missile. So overall, just a lot of cards that are card advantage. It kind of just wants to be a tempo-y spell slinger deck. Good mid-range effects that are like giving us a lot of removal here and there while we sort of burn our opponent out, draw a bunch of cards. Really, honestly, solid strategy overall. It's just probably a little slow to get to the point where you can do the huge burn spell to actually finish your opponent off. But we do also have some old cards we can add in. So cards like Mysteria from BP06, fantastic removal card. Or cards like Heinlein and Craig from some of the even earlier sets that are going to fill our cemetery quickly, and they just happen to be academic as well. So a lot of good options here. Probably going to take a bit of thinking to figure out what the exact right combination for them for the deck is, because there's definitely more than you have room for. But I think it's definitely a deck with potential. Next up, we got the fun one. We have Onion Rune. So, Onion Patch is a bronze from this set. He is a 1-cost 1/1 with Rush. As long as there are 5 Onion Patches in your cemetery, he has Storm, and Strike deals 1 to an enemy follower. You can play up to 50 copies of him. So, of course, the Onion Patch decks are going to be playing... generally, it's between like 20 and 24 copies of Onion Patch. We have Burgent to, on play, top 5, summon 2 Onion Patches, and then on Evo, we can pay 1 and engage her to search for 2 Onion Patches and summon them. And then she, of course, makes them all do 1 more damage. So they're attacking for 2 and Strike burning for 2. Really powerful when you can actually get a bunch of them into play. If you just, on turn 5, Burgent hit 2 Onions out of the top and then summon 2 more, you have 8 damage to the face with Storm, and then 8 damage to followers on Strike on turn 5, which is really solid. Like, that's actually surprisingly good for what seems like it should just be a meme. And both of them are Arcana form, so we can use Elusa, the Magic Wunderkind, to essentially be a Maid Leader clone that searches Arcana form followers. So it can search Burgent, most importantly, but allows us to sort of play a toolbox of other Arcana form followers like Lovely Heart Monica, which 3-drop 2/3, it gets us a 1/1 into play from our deck, so thins our deck, makes our Burgent more likely to hit, but is also draw discard, which can help us sort of fuel that 5 Onion Patches we need in Cemetery early. And then she's also removal by engaging herself and Mora. We can play a couple of other Arcana form cards like Saphira, which is a 9-cost Storm, or just a 4-cost Rush. 6 defense is huge on a 4-drop, but she gains attack equal to the number of Runecraft followers in Cemetery, and if we're filling our Cemetery with Onions, that number is going to get really big really fast. You can also play things like Snowman King, since you can tutor it off of Elusa. It's sort of a floodgatey card. It stops followers that cost 3 or less from attacking. So in matchups where your opponent is playing a more low-to-the-ground aggro strategy, you can just play this and sort of stop your opponent from attacking until your Snowman King can just beat them to the ground. So it gives you a little bit of a flexible game plan there, though you do have to be aware that your Onions can also not attack while Snowman King is in play. Alright, jumping into Dragoncraft. This is going to be the other class that got a deluxe starter deck. So, of course, we have the Draconic Duelist Dragon deck. This one is interesting. It's, unlike Academic, does not have older support. Obviously, you can play older cards in it. You can still play things like Dragon Oracle, Forte, whatever else you want. PDK, even a lot of these are cheap cards. But we're focusing on this new trait here. Bromelia, the cover card, has a Last Words that makes an Aftershock token. It's an amulet. If you already have one, then she puts a counter on it when she dies. Otherwise, you summon it. And she herself is just a removal effect on Evo as long as you have an amulet in play. The second and onwards will trigger off of Aftershock. Earlier copies, these will often play like Dragon Nest or whatever. Just cheap amulets to get you there. But Aftershock itself gets a lightning counter every time a Draconic Duelist enters your field. If it has 5 or more counters, you can engage it to give +2 attack to a Dragoncraft follower. If it has 10 or more, you can destroy an enemy follower and deal 3 to its leader, which is even more damage and removal. So, a very powerful amulet once you get it set up, and a lot of the deck is going to be focused around setting it up quickly. So we have a lot of followers that are going to get multiple bodies into play for us. Pure Voice Dragoon lets you search your deck for a cost 4 or less and summon it. So he himself and the 4 cost will both put a counter on the Lightning Strike. The Draconic, or the Poseidon is going to search your deck for 2 Draconic Duelists that cost 2 or less, summon them and shuffle. And then Hypersonic Dragonute is going to, at overflow at least, be able to pay 1 to summon extra copies of herself out. So all of these can sort of stack counters very quickly so that you can get to the extra damage and destroy mode. And then you also have some very cheap Storm followers here that you're going to be able to search off of things like Poseidon. So Masamune, if you have at least 3 Duelist cards on your field, he gets +2/+2 in Storm, so that's 4 Storm damage. And then Dragoon Scyther has Storm just as long as there's another Draconic Duelist card on your field, period. The Aftershock is going to count towards both of these, so it's very easy to meet the requirements and just sort of be able to hit your opponent for a lot of damage very quickly. Spell Dragon. This is sort of a alternative to a traditional ramp dragon build. You can see Lindworm here, the main card that we're going to be playing, is a double-sided evolution. However, it is a 10 cost 10/10 that costs 5 to evolve. You may be wondering, how are we going to pay 15 play points in a turn? You're not. Fanfare, he recovers play points equal to the number of Dragoncraft spells in your cemetery. So, he essentially, you can't play him until you hit 10, but he could essentially cost, as little as 0. And once you get him down to 5 cost by having 5 spells in your cemetery, you'll be able to evolve him the turn you play him. He can evolve into a Ward that heals you 6 and draws 3 cards, or into a Storm that ignores Ward. Generally, you'd want to be going for the Storm that ignores Ward. He's just a Genesis Dragon alternative, basically, that could cost you less than Genesis Dragon. It's going to be able to swing into your opponent more consistently than Genesis Dragon, but he has a defensive mode if you absolutely need it. This set gave us a few other cards that sort of care about spells. Dragonplate Warrior is whenever you play a Dragoncraft spell, you can deal 2 to each enemy follower on the field. Roy lets us search for a 2-cost Dragoncraft spell, which of course could be Oracle or just various removal spells. Drakewing Assassin deals damage equal to the number of Dragoncraft spells in our cemetery when he enters, so he's essentially just destroy removal that can scale way higher than you'll actually need him to be able to deal. So pretty solid for 3 cost. And then the set also gave us a handful of new spells to go along with this. Force of the Dragonute is 3 damage, draw discard, and then Dragon's Handspur is deal 2, draw a card. So both of these help us sort of keep our hand healthy and help fuel our cemetery with spells so that we can get these effects online. And of course, being Dragoncraft, we have plenty of spells that the decks always run in the ramp-focused builds. Things like Blazing Breath, Conflagration, Serpent's Wrath, Dragon Oracle, and even Draconic Fervor are just all cards you could play in this deck that are going to build toward your spell count. Unlike the Forest deck, this doesn't need different names. This just needs total spells. So having 3 Oracles in your cemetery is 3 play points you're getting back on your Lindworm. So ramp as fast as you can. Next up, Natura Dragon. This deck, similar to Natura Sword, didn't really get many new cards, but I think it's worth mentioning in passing here. It got Jerva of Draconic Mail. This is basically just a new finisher for the deck. 5 cost 5/5, Fanfare, discard your hand. At the start of your end phase, deal 5 to each other follower on the field and draw a card. If you evolve Jerva, he also deals 5 to your opponent's leader at the end of the turn. So this is kind of a number of different things. If you're playing the deck and your hand gets super low because you're discarding cards to things like Dracomancer's Rites, you're not really having to discard much to this anyway, so it's just drawing you a card and dealing a bunch of damage. It is burn damage that hits your opponent and can act as a pseudo-storm finisher. But it is also, if you have a reasonably sized hand, a way to discard it all and turbocharge your Shadow's Corrosions by filling your cemetery with Natura cards more quickly. So it sort of fills a lot of flexible roles that the deck could want out of an off-trait splash card that may give it just the finishing power that it needs to sort of stay relevant in this kind of format. Moving on to Abysscraft. We have the other highly anticipated deck from the set, Vampire Abyss. Vanya being a super popular character from Rage of Bahamut, and then of course, I guess she's in Grand Blue Fantasy as well, and Shadowverse. So everyone loves Vanya. Vampy is core, as the kids say. She's very similar to Orcus, actually. 3 cost 3/3, puts a forest bat into your EX area. You can evolve her for 1 into a 4/4. On evolve, draw discard. Makes all of your forest bats cost 1 less, and whenever a forest bat's put onto your field, you gain +1 life. Or you can pay 3 to evolve her into a 6/6 storm. While it's on your field, your forest bats also still cost 1 less, and whenever one enters your field, you deal 3 to an enemy follower. So early game, you can sort of fuel your cemetery with the draw ditch and gain a bunch of life. Late game, you have a storm that clears your opponent's board by pushing up a bunch of bats. Very powerful card. We also have some things that care about like Vanya name in cemetery, so we actually have 6 Vanyas now, counting the old one from set 2, that can work toward that as well. We get a handful of low-cost followers. Raven. The Noontide Raven and Midnight Vampire Raven are both going to make a Forest Bat into our EX area when we play them, and then Noontide will heal us, Midnight will deal a damage to the opponent once per turn when a Forest Bat enters. Eventide, however, the 2 cost, does not make a bat, but if you engage her and sack a bat, you can either deal 4 to an enemy follower and draw a card, or 2 to the enemy leader, gain 2 life and draw a card. Very, very powerful effect. I'd honestly go so far as to say pretty over-spec, even for a 2-drop, being able to do 4 damage removal that draws a card is the big thing, right? Most of these tokens are not costing us a card to make, so we're going card positive here by drawing cards off of these, and it can either be a burn effect that forces your opponent to just remove her, like spend some kind of removal on her, or a removal effect on their followers. We also have plenty of other ways to turn our vampires into removal. The set 2 Vanya that I mentioned gets bigger off the number of forest bats on your field, and can pay 1 and sack a forest bat to deal 3 to an enemy follower and 1 to its leader. Helps us build up chip damage. And the new Old Blood King gives us 2 bats on play, and gives all of our forest bats rush and assail. And then on evolve also gives them an all-in extra attack. This can be used as removal, or if you have forest bats that have stuck around for a turn, you can buff them all +1 attack to be able to swing into your opponent for a lot of damage. We of course play the old cards Summon Bloodkin and Unleash the Vampire that make us a bunch of forest bats, and the new Gift for Bloodkin, which we're going to be able to play for free if we have 5 or more vampires in cemetery. It makes 2 forest bats, and if we have a Vanya in our cemetery, we draw a card. We can use these to build up wide boards of bats in the early turns, and if our opponent doesn't answer them, we have plenty of ways to buff their attack, to swing in for a ton of damage at once, punish our opponent for not clearing out our 1/1s, and just wreak a bunch of havoc overall. Next deck we have is Departed Abyss. This is the Ektar deck. He's back. Honestly, he was probably kind of back last set. I don't think I really talked about him. In set 8, we got Tartarus the Tormentor. He's a demon, not departed, but all of his effects care about departed cards. He is a 10-drop 7/7 that we can pay 1 and put him from hand into EX to look at top 2, add a departed to hand, bury the rest, and then he costs 5 instead of 10 if we have at least 15 departed in cemetery. Now, in set 9, we get Arcus, Spirited Manager. He can't attack enemies, he is a 2-cost 5/5, but start of main phase, Necro 10, we get a Ghost, which is just incidental chip damage. An activated ability, we can bury a follower to choose one of the following. Draw a card, summon 2 ghosts, or bury 2 cards. This is very flexible. It can be card advantage, or it can be chip damage, or it can be turbocharging our Necro charge effects, which, of course, Demon Lord Ektar has always generally been a card that you're playing off of Necro Charge 10, where you just fanfare get to reanimate 2 guys and give them +1/+1. Early on, he was never really hitting Necro Charge 20 too consistently. However, With these cards, and with some other new cards we've gotten in this set and recent sets, such as Marion the Mummy, Chris Pumpkinhead, and Set 9's Poltergeist, we have a lot of ways to bury cards now. We can actually fairly consistently get to that Necro Charge 20 while we're still alive and still have plenty of things to do. And once we get to Necro Charge 20, the goal is kind of just loop Ektar over and over again using things like Death's Breath, Tartarus's Evo effect that reanimates any departed follower, and Hell's Unleasher to loop things like Demonium or Lesser Mummy or Chris Pumpkinhead or whatever else over and over again, make giant boards that we're giving plus attack and defense to until we eventually just have a board that our opponent can't answer and run them over. Lastly, 2-cost Abyss. This is another deck that didn't get a whole lot in this set. There's basically actually no Abyss cards that it got. However, the new neutral craft cards, the cover cards of the set actually, Amaterasu, Tsukuyomi, and Moon and Sun, all cost 2, conveniently enough. Amaterasu is a ward that heals, Tsukuyomi is a rush that burns the opponent, and Moon and Sun is a spell that can summon either of them from the deck, or, for 4 play points, both of them from the cemetery. This gives the deck just some alternative things to do in the early game, and even mid-game that are healing and chip damage. They can sort of help it out a little bit, just give it things to do with extra 2 costs. So overall, I think these are decent additions to the deck. Not really sure what ratios you would add them at or what to cut in particular, but these are some cards to consider for the deck. Final craft we have here, Haven Craft. There's actually only one deck I want to talk about. It is Amulet Haven. Same deck from BP08. Focused around Alexiel. It's generally a control deck here where we're playing just a lot of the good amulets from throughout the sets until we build up to Alexiel healing us 8, burning the opponent 8, and being a ward. I think it's a strong deck. I think it was a decently strong deck last set. This set, it actually gets a bit more to help push it in that direction. We get the Serenian Hind is our flip Evo. It's a 4-cost 4/4 that lets us top 5 for an amulet, and then on evolve, it sacks an amulet to either heal 4 and be a ward, or deal 4 to an enemy leader or follower and be a Bane removal. So we have healing, we have removal, we have burn damage. Just a lot of options while also sacking an amulet, which can trigger the last words effects that they've been putting on a lot of amulets as of recent. Last set we had, of course, like healing on last words. We had burning our opponent on last words, and now this set we also get Moriai Encomium, which draws a card and then destroys an enemy follower on last words. And the new amulet White Fang Temple, which is a 3-cost. It heals us at every end phase, and then once it has it's done that 3 times, we get to search for a 4-cost or lower faith follower, which is probably just the deer, and bring it out. The other options you can use with this are like Boost Kicker is a faith follower. There's a handful of other faith followers you've got, and yeah, that's it for the decks. Excuse me while I click through this a couple times because I actually mess this up here, but this is pretty much what I'd look at for the tier list for set 9. I was gonna reveal all those one by one, but I guess we forgot to do that. Tier 3, Natura Forest, D-Shift, which I didn't really talk about here. I didn't really get any new cards this set. Idolatry, didn't really get any new cards this set. Onion, Natura Dragon, 2-cost Abyss, and Departed Abyss, I think are all what I'd put in tier 3. Those are decks that I think are definitely playable if you want to try to make them work. They probably have some good matchups here and there, but I think overall are just a bit weaker than what you're going to be running into a lot of the time, and are just probably not going to be able to maintain positive win rates against the strongest decks here. Tier 2, I have Puppetry Forest, Natura Sword, Academic Rune, Draconic Duelist Dragon, and Amulet Haven. I think these are all thoroughly solid decks that can play pretty reasonable games. They're going to, of course, definitely have some good matchups, some bad matchups. They are decks I would expect to see topping, assuming people play them. I think Puppetry will definitely still see some play here and there. The other decks, hard to say. Natura maybe a little bit. Academic and Draconic Duelist are decks that Japan didn't have in this format, so really hard to say where they'll fall. And Amulet Haven always has some players here and there, just from a control standpoint. But these are, of course, decks, again, that I think are going to fall a little behind the Tier 1 decks. Not going to be able to beat them all consistently. Maybe have a good matchup against like 1 or 2 of them, but not enough to consistently make it through tournaments. Tier 1, I think, is Token Sword, Earthright, Rune, and Vampire Abyss. In general, I think all 3 of these decks stand sort of a pretty good distance above the rest of the field here. All 3 of these decks got pushed really hard this set. And sort of play like a little bit of a rock, paper, scissors-y matchup with each other, where Earthright, having good mid-rangey removal, is going to be able to beat the Sword deck a lot of the time, but Sword can beat Vampire since it's fast aggro while Vampire is trying to set up. And Vampire probably does not always beat Earthright, but at least has a decent matchup into it, where you have a lot of recursion and board building that the Earthright deck might just struggle to deal with over and over again. And of course, you can get in lots of very good early burst damage off of buffing your bats if the Earthright deck doesn't draw wide removal in the early game. So yeah, I think that is about where I'd put my BP09 tier list, what I'd expect to see. Worlds in a couple weeks here, I'm expecting to see a ton of Earthright, ton of Vampire, probably not as many people playing Sword, just based off of what we had from Japanese results, but I think it will still do quite well. And these other decks, I think you'll see them here and there, but I don't expect a lot of the people playing in Worlds specifically to be running them. I think it's just too big of a tournament to not play the absolute best decks in the format unless someone thinks they've really broken like Draconic Duelist or something that was a little less explored. Come Springfest, once we have the first couple Springfest Summerfest events this year, I think all the way through like Rosemont, it's still going to be BP09 format, so team format, you're going to see a little more experimentation, a little wider of a range of decks being played, and I think a lot of these other decks will have a good chance to shine there. Other than that, thank you for watching. I know this has been a bit of a long one, but hopefully I was a little helpful in just sort of breaking down what new stuff to expect to see from this set. Obviously didn't go super in-depth on any of them. We'll have dedicated videos for the decks for that. But yeah, hopefully this is helpful. Y'all can look forward to seeing a couple of deck profile videos in the coming weeks for these new decks as I sort of mess around with them and figure them out. Until then, you can watch some of my older stuff, should be on the screen now. And yeah, thank you for watching. We'll see you next time.